My name is Lelia. I'm from One More Page Books. We're a very small independent bookstore right over by like East Falls Church Metro. It's in the area. You can know where that is. And if you don't, thanks for coming. I know we have some people who come from pretty far away, like New York, even, which is amazing. Like it's harder for me to get here, and I live like 5 miles away. So kudos to you. Sorry, I'm very nervous. It's been a long time since I studied for so thank you all so much for being here. You passed the first test, which was finding the space. I know you were all like, does this place exist? Is it in a different realm of reality? But we're here, and you all did it. Thank you. I shout out to Prologue Theater, which is the space that we are in. This is their rehearsal space. They're an amazing nonprofit theater based here, and if you follow them, or if you don't follow them, you should follow them on Instagram and Twitter, and you can see all the great stuff they're up to. There's a bookmark for their upcoming show, which has like a promo code at the bottom that I think gives you $5 whole off. Take that if you would like one. Those tickets go on sale at the end of March for the Revolutionists, which is, I'm told, about 4 historical women during the French Revolution. So I was like, all right, that sounds really cool. Thank you to Jason and Christy for making this happen. They are the people that make Prologue run. Cool, that's all I have for the intro part that's not about me. So now talk about me, which is why we're all here. You all don't really need to know the whole spiel because you probably know who Schwab is based on the fact that you are present. Or if you are watching virtually, then you are present in your own home or someone else's home. I don't know your life. But then you were watching, and thank you for reading. And we were lucky enough to be able to host an event with the 9 years ago in our tiny bookstore. Sorry, I keep touching the microphone now. For the archive, if you've read it. And so that was an incredible, successful event for us, and we were so grateful that we came. And then we came back, and as we got more and more famous, it was amazing to us that they kept remembering that we existed and coming and doing events with us at Tiny Bookstore in Arlington, Virginia. So here we are, needing a bigger space than our small bookstore, which I think we did for the last 3 events also. So again, it just really shows that even when you're a really big time author with, I think I counted as 20 books. I stopped counting at 20 because I was like, 21! Oh, your books are great! So yeah, lots of great books. They're all amazing, and you work so hard, and we're so grateful. Thank you for not forgetting us and for still coming back and doing events with us, even when there's a lot of circumstances that kind of make it hard. So we'll do another round of applause for me in a second. And I want to say shout out to Patricia, who has been Dee's conversation partner, I think, in several of those events. And I think she makes it every time. I'm so grateful. And just a couple little details. You obviously all know to wear your masks. Thank you so much for doing that. Due to this, we're not going to have any photos with you and me together. You can take a pen and photo while you're standing in line or whatever while she's signing. And book-wise, we're going to just do 2 books just because I want you all to be able to get home tonight. So I don't want us to be here at midnight. So one of those can be personalized, and one's just going to be a signature. We can talk about that more afterwards. But I will not take up any more of the precious time. Thank you so much to Dee and Patricia for being here. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for a lot.
Sorry, we're going to speak fast here. I'm so sorry. We were trying to figure out if we should try that way or to center here, but we made our own choice. Hello! A real event in person, except for people.
Also real people.
Yeah. Now, because we're up here, we're going to take our masks off because we're a very safe distance, and because for legibility purposes, it's also, I don't know about you all, but like, I read this as listening to people, and I find it's a lot easier. So, hello. Hi.
It's weird being in public with your radio.
So weird. I know. I feel like I'm doing something wrong. I just want to take a moment to be really happy to see all of you, even if it's this part of you. Thank you so much for coming out and doing this with us. Like, Patricia didn't have a choice, but you all have a choice. So thank you. Oh, 2.5 years. I have been in hibernation. I don't know about all of you. This is very surreal. This is my 4th book to come out during the pandemic, which is a lot of books to come out during the pandemic. Yeah.
Especially considering how much you complain that you didn't get anything.
I know. For those who don't know, Patricia is not only one of my best friends, but also my soul beta reader in the entire universe and has been my beta reader for all 21 projects, basically. You are my library. I keep my library outside of my own head by putting it in someone else's head. Yes, you are my archive for safekeeping. That was a very deep cut. It was a very deep cut.
All right. So, but tonight we're going to talk about GALLANT, which I'm so excited about because one of the hard parts, I would say, about being the beta reader is that I have read these books and then the publishing process begins, and so it's a very long time before everybody else has, and so I just have to like sit with it in my corner by myself. So it's always really exciting to be at the book launch where I get to kind of talk about the book and tweet about it in public with everybody else. So I'm super excited to be doing this with you guys. One of the things that's so cool about this book, and I think that this book really brought up for me, is the fact that I remember being at my mom's house like 4 or 5 years ago in North Carolina, walking around my bedroom, and Victoria calls, as she does, to say, I have an idea. And this idea was a secret garden, but like darker, and the way that she described it is so interesting to me because this book is everything that she described at the very beginning. But for all the twists and turns that it took and changes that came about, this book is everything that she described it would be for that initial, like, I have an idea. So I wanted to have you talk about sort of the things that did change from what you thought it would be initially versus the things that didn't.
Yeah, because that's the thing, right, is that I often describe an idea as like a shiny glass orb filled with light, and the act of writing as taking that orb and then smashing it against the nearest wall. And then the act of revising is cobbling it back together again and hoping that you can make it light up. And Patricia has the inauspicious state of knowing the initial idea and then watching me like wander in the dark for years trying to find my way back to it. And GALLANT especially, so my stories can have a really long speak time. Even though I wrote quickly, GALLANT was written in about 6 months and revised for another 6 months or so. It took 4 or 5 years for me to start writing it. And that was because I thought I was writing a fairy tale. I had this image in my mind, I had all the pieces of a fairy tale, a haunted estate and a garden wall, and I kept, holding is like you have this idea, or I had this idea for a wall, learning how to be around people again. I had this idea for a wall, and the thing that makes the wall strange is that a wall really needs to have multiple sides to enclose something, and I only had one side. I just wanted a wall sitting like a ruin in the middle of a yard with a door in it, and the door was locked. And the idea, the question really is, why do you need a locked door and a wall that you can walk all the way around? What is the purpose of a locked door? And so I kept, really for almost 4 years, trying to answer the question, what is on the other side of the door? No, I'm not going to tell you what's on the other side of the door because that would be a spoiler for the book. But what I will say is, for years and years, I thought, if this is a fairy tale and what's on the other side of the door is a forest, is a fae court, is a king. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Holly Black. Right? Holly Black, the quintessential fairy tale teller. I am not Holly Black. Shocking. I know. But like I kept trying to tell a story that Holly Black would have told, not a story that I would have told. And so for years I found myself staring at this garden door, being like, what is on the other side of you and why doesn't it feel right? And then one day, and I don't think I called you right after I figured this out, I was like, oh, I'm not telling a fairy tale. I'm telling an underworld tale. And as soon as I realized that, this is a death tale. And someone, it coincided with someone asking me what all my books had in common. And I was like, absolutely nothing. This is book 21. At the time the question was asked, I think there were 19. And they were like, what does it have in common? And I started trying to make a Venn diagram. And I realized that the only thing my books had in common were like,
Death and siblings.
yeah, death and siblings really is what it came down to. Death, the primary entity. And as soon as I started figuring that out, I was like, okay, well, where's the death in this book? And I was like, oh, the death is beyond the door. And it was just like when you're making a meal and you find the ingredient that takes it from a counter full of ingredients to something cohesive. And as soon as I figured out what was beyond the door, I knew the story that I was writing. But it took years.
I was gonna say, it sounds like very glamorous right now. What I really have is like years of, I can't write this book. This book isn't writing itself. I might just have to, just not write it. I might have to just not
Cancel the contract.
Cancel the contract. Do you think they'll be okay with that?
They were like, no. Figure of ideas as if, I mean, bless the authors who have dreams and like wake up with their stories fully formed. The only idea I've ever had that I've woken up with fully formed, it's not for a book, it's for a bakery, and I'm gonna have it one day. I'm letting it on in here. And it's gonna be a bakery where all of these little handheld cakes are shaped like books and have covers on them, and if you want to get a whole set like the baker's dozen, it turns into a bookshelf, and you eat the books, and it's going to be called the Book Eaters. And to this day, it is the only dream I have ever had. Like, more than I realize, and I am determined to make it one day. So if you know any pastry chefs, please tell me, because I think it's a really great idea. But novels do not come to me this way.
You eat the shelf.
Well, it could be chocolate, I guess. But like, I was thinking more than the shelf would be a reusable shelf that you could then like order more books for. Exactly. And then like, I just think this has a future because it's very handheld. It's like a cupcake, but in book form, like a ho-ho, but in book form. It's like, and like, it would be better than fondant. It would be like whatever is better than fondant because nobody actually wants to eat fondant. But it would be something that you would hold in your hand, and it would have a cover, and it would be beautiful and decorated. You'd feel a little bit guilty eating it, but you wouldn't feel so guilty if you didn't eat it.
Because then the tagline of your shop can be, a book is a world you eat in your hand.
See, we're working on it. My publicist is like, focus. I mean, ideas come to me so slowly. And so much of the idea is almost like a Rubik's Cube. It's a problem that I'm turning over and over and over. And unfortunately, this one has to hear me do it for years at a time. I'm like, hey, remember that idea I had 3 years ago that I've been stuck on? I think it's about death. And you're like, it's always been about death, Victoria. You just couldn't figure that out for yourself. So, yeah, I realized it was a story about death. And suddenly, and I want to be very clear, it makes my book sound very sad. But when I say death, and it is a sad book. But when I say death, I think what I'm really talking about, if you've read more than one of my books or any of my books, you'll know this, it's really about disempowering death and empowering the human. It's about taking something from death. It's about an exchange. You know, in Villains, in Vicious and Vengeful, it's about reclaiming power from death. In a lot of books, it's about putting off death. Happens in both Addie LaRue and in the Shades of Magic series. It's about extracting power from death and taking that power unto yourself. That's really what I mean. I think when I say it's a book about death, you're like, ooh, grief. And there is grief in it, but there is also agency.
I'm trying to make sure something's in the jacket copy.
You try not to spoil my book.
Yeah.
You're gonna
It's
spoil
really
it.
hard.
Don't spoil my book. It literally came out yesterday.
Are we allowed to talk about her specifically, Olivia?
Some parts of her.
Yeah, her specifically.
Yeah.
We should have done this before, but we never
We
did.
should have like talked about
Yeah, so I do not think it's a spoiler this book. We learned very early on that Olivia does not have a vocal speaking voice, and she speaks other ways. And so one of the things I wanted to have Victoria talk about for all of you, because it's been one of the most fascinating parts of this book in particular, was the ways in which that provided a sort of like a space to give someone agency to talk about how they find their voice and what that looks like when it's not vocal. Because I think so often, especially recently, we associate voice with like, who's the loudest person in the room?
Absolutely.
And this really turned that on its head and made it more about finding your voice that's unique to you and the ways that that doesn't have to be loud.
Yeah. So, and I was really interesting. I worked really hard not to put it in the marketing material because I think so often when you have any form of marginalization, it becomes reductive, and then that becomes your reason for existing in the story, your justification for existing in the story, and it's not the plot. It's like it's one thing when it's vital to plot. So Olivia's a nonverbal protagonist, which was a really interesting challenge that I set out to do because I wanted to explore the nature of a voice and the idea that not spoken does not in any way mean silent, right? Olivia absolutely has a voice. And it's interesting because there was never a version of the story where she was a verbal protagonist. From page one, I knew that I needed to write the story in third person because it would have an audiobook. And I knew that if I wrote it in first person, then an audio narrator would become Olivia's voice. And that would have been, in my mind, just like a shattering element of the story. I also am somebody who relies very heavily on dialogue. And I was like, let me just take that away. But at the same time, it's really a story about the shape that a voice takes and about the way in which we struggle to find a common vocabulary, common method of speaking. Olivia has a voice, but it is a voice that many people around her don't hear and don't care to learn, you know? And I think, you know, I can get very, very like meta about it and talk about like in many ways, my teenage character is a reflection of who I was as a teenager and what I needed and how I felt. Obviously, I'm a verbal person, but at the same time, I was also a closeted teen in a time and I didn't even understand to myself, you know, who I was. And so what happened was I lacked a vocabulary. I could not find a language to stand on, to speak, to communicate what I was feeling. And that was such an isolating and claustrophobic experience. It was such an intensely lonely experience. And so much of Olivia is that, right? It's feeling lonely. It's feeling kind of trapped in an empty house. And in that way, the house in this book, Gallant, the estate, is like many settings in horror novels and in horror films, which is to say that like the external landscape becomes the internal landscape. Like this is the inside of Olivia's head as much as it is the physical space that she's occupying. I think that if you take away the jump scares of a lot of horror, what you're left with is the quiet fear of being alone with yourself, of being alone in the silence. And that's something that Olivia is surrounded by, being alone in this way. But yeah, the nonverbal element is so crucial to her because I really wanted to challenge myself as a creator and also the reader as a consumer to look at the way in which we make assumptions about what a default voice is, the shapes that it should take. Olivia is a very loud character, and I would challenge anyone to not find her voice on the page. I feel like it comes through every minute. But yeah, it was a choice I made in the very beginning, and it was a very challenging choice. And I think the ways in which I was challenged surprised me as the creator. Because obviously I default to all forms of verbal storytelling in my books, but I'm really proud of how it came out.
Thank you. So one of the things that you guys have been to any of these talks, especially here before, one of the things that you will know about Victoria is that she writes out of order. And I'm not talking about writing a chapter out of order. I'm talking about like down to the sentence level, the words can be out of order, and then she figures out how to put them back together. So that process is harrowing at best.
It's so that if I die, no one can assemble my books. It'll be like one great puzzle.
That is absolutely true. So that is
It's a kind of other reason.
but Gallant was the first book that chapter 1 she wrote it, and she sent me chapter 1, followed by chapter 2, and then and I was like, hi, what's going on? Yeah, you okay? Pandemic, what's going on? And this, I think I'm writing this book in order. And so I wanted to let you talk about what it was like for the first time to write a book in order.
I mean, it was horrible. Like, I still want, in my defense, to say that I wrote the lines within each chapter out of order first, because that's like my process. I kind of feel like, you know, when there's gonna be a lot of metaphors. I'm sorry, fans. It's just the way that my brain works. But like, you know, when you start a puzzle, like the first thing you do is you like dump all the pieces onto the table. That's how I write a scene. So like, I have a vision in my head of what the scene needs to be, the shape of it, and then it's like, here's a line of dialogue. And then it's like, here's a description. Here's the first line of the scene, here's the last line of the scene, and I'll start dropping the puzzle pieces down on the table because I have the outline. I know what I'm doing. I have a picture, right? But the actual crafting for me is like, and here's like a crucial sentence. And I build almost around the pillars of those moments. But to your point, aside, the exception being the very last page, because I write the ending first, gives me the thing to work for. We could talk about that from a craft perspective later. But ending aside, I wrote this entire book in order. And it was weird, and I will never do it again, but there was a reason. There was a reason I had to do it. Coming off of really scope, like very grand novels like Addie LaRue and Shades of Magic. Shades of Magic has multiple timelines and multiple perspectives. Addie has multiple timelines and multiple perspectives. This has one. This is one girl's story. And there's a journal threaded through as kind of a found object so that you can try and race Olivia to solve a mystery. But Olivia's story is told one directionally in a single timeline. And as a creator, I wanted to feel the building momentum. It's in many ways, a very small story. And I feel like I don't mean that in a qualitative way. I mean that I want this to be the kind of story that you can read in a single sitting, but after you put it down, it follows you for years. Like that's what I mean by small story, consumable, bite-sized, like the books that I want to put in my bakery. And the thing about that is that in order to stay almost claustrophobically with Olivia as she goes on this adventure, I didn't want to leave her. And if I jumped ahead, what might happen was that I would lose the tension. And so instead, I just followed her. I just set that little like snowball off down the hill and watched it gain mass and momentum as it went. That was the idea anyway, so that when it crashes at the bottom, you have the impact. You need that. And so it was really, the only reason I was able to write it the way that I did, linearly and in order, is because of that almost like single focus trajectory, a like seeming simplicity of narrative that was charging toward an ending that I had already written and was very excited about. But yeah, 21 books, and it's the first one I ever wrote in order. And I remember being just as surprised as you were, because I was like, what's this? And you're used to, like, I'm used to being like, hey Patricia, here's chapter 22 of Threads of Power, book 1. Sorry, there's no chapters 1 through 21. I'm getting up there. And like, you're used to writing it like completely piecemeal, and I was like, chapter 1, chapter 2,
It was
chapter 3.
when Threads of Power started coming in. It was like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back to this. Right? So this is like sort of my question for this. Has anybody here read Addie LaRue? So
Thank you.
yeah. So the thing about Addie LaRue is, imagine you read Addie LaRue, but you didn't get to read the whole thing. You got to read it like one chapter every few weeks, and they weren't in order. They were, so that's kind of like what the normal process is like.
No, it's true, it's true. And the thing, Abby was the worst of it. Abby was,
No, it's not.
no. Abby was the most out of order that I've ever written. Hold on. But I know this because I had to do something. It was the exact opposite creative process. Hear me out. Because Abby is a character novel, something I had never written before, which is to say that like character first, plot second has a plot, but like not the guiding force that really scared me. But also, there is such bald emotional truth in Abby. A lot of times in my fantasy, I'm able to kind of bury the vulnerability beneath the veneer of the supernatural, but Abby was a book guided by heart. And what that meant was that I had like all 300 chapters really of it, 300 scenes laid out, like books on a shelf. We'll go back to that, not the eating thing. And I would each day I would essentially, I knew I could not take a day off writing. Once I started drafting Abby, if I stopped, I would abandon it. I was so scared of drafting Abby. Like it was the tension, the emails that you and my mother got, basically every single day of like, I can't do this, I can't do it, I like don't want to do it, I'm ruining it, I'm making it. So what I would do is, in order to make sure that I'm made for it, I would maybe like just put it in a file that I couldn't touch. But Abby, I would essentially wake up and I would ask myself, what am I capable of writing today? Am I capable of writing a love scene? Am I capable of writing a death scene? Am I capable of writing like, and it was really me working around the darkest night in Henry's life, this one chapter that I took 2.5 months to write, but essentially I would just pick whatever I wanted to write that day, because Addie is such a capsule narrative story that I could pick a flashback, I could pick a present day, I could write it however I wanted in order to get all the bones down. Gallant is not. What do you think? Wait, what was the worst? Gallery of Shadows. Oh, The Unbound. Yeah. But the second archive book, I just wanted to throw myself off a cliff. That's fine. But even still, I wrote that like largely in order. No, I don't remember. This is the other thing about me. I have no memory for anything. I don't have any children, but I have been told it is like childbirth, where if you remembered it accurately, you would never do it again. And so apparently it's a traumatic response to like actually lock off memory and retcon your own life so that you feel safe. And so I do this with every single book. It's probably why 21 books in, I can't remember my last name.
That's why you get text messages and you're like, I think you're going to delete the whole book. And it's like, could you finish 75%?
Yeah, exactly. The worst part is literally everyone in my life can do this now. You can do this, my publicist can do it, my agent can do it. They'll be like, let me pull up this receipt from 3.5 years ago where you did the exact same sentence.
I wrote a library of memes that is one for each phase of the book.
Yeah. But I genuinely, I'm not even being like, I just have no memory of this. You know that. And that's the only reason you tolerate it. And you get those emails from me at like 3 in the morning that's like, I hate it, hate everything about it, but I'm with Iceland and raise goats. And you're like, oh, I see you are 62% of the way through this book. Excellent. Right on schedule.
Well, and the reason I was asking about Addie was to get back to sort of like the craft perspective of the endings. So Victoria always writes the endings first. I never get to read the ending until the book is finished.
I gotta keep you invested. Like, I gotta stick it out.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I wanted to let you talk about from a craft perspective, because this is really interesting. This is something that is very unique to your process. And we've talked to a lot of authors about how to do this, but it's always really interesting when you describe why the end first and why you have to write the end before you write the rest.
Yes. First of all, question, how many of you like to write? Okay, great. So this will hit for you as well, because there's like an explanation to this answer for reading, and there's an explanation for writing. Personally, from a craft perspective, I need the ending in order to not quit. So the trick is there, right? If you have an ending in mind, not just I don't even like a placeholder ending. I mean, you need to have an ending that you are excited about. This is your nailing it. This is a punctuation mark on your whole work, is that last page. That is what people are going to shut that book, and their opinion of everything that came by before the last page is going to be colored by the last page. It is just the way we are as consumers. It happens no matter what it is we're consuming. So I want to have an ending that I'm deeply excited by, because on good days, I have a propulsive force pushing me forward. Like the ending it's in a desert and it's reduced to a football field. It's a measure like here to there and I can cross it. Similarly, on bad days, I won't quit because I have an ending. And sure, there might be a distance between where I am and the ending of the book, but if I know the ending and I know where I am, well, I can start saying, well, what's something that happens between here and there? Okay, so this happens halfway between, what did happen here? And I can start to build a breadcrumb trail for myself to get to the end. I think the biggest trouble we have as writers is the propensity to quit a book, shift our attention to the shiny new idea as we become familiar with the thing we're working on. And so I think anything you can do to get to the end of a first draft is imperative. And like, I don't think it erodes your discovery. I'm also an outliner, so for me, discovery happens in the planning stage, not the execution stage. I do a huge amount, months and months of brainstorming before I start writing a book. That's my discovery. Once I start writing the book, my anxiety is like, please just get it down on the paper. Don't drop the balls, don't drop the plates, don't drop the atlas. It feels like you're holding up the world. Like, just get it down, just get it down. The other reason that I like to have the endings is because I create in reverse. So like, for instance, I'm not telling you what the ending of Gallant is, obviously, but once I had the ending, the last page, the last moment, then I could rewind my characters to figure out who they need to be when we first meet them. A good example is Lila Bard in Shades of Magic. When I know how we leave her at the end of book 1, sailing off, then I can rewind and figure out what version of Lila do we need to meet on page 1 to get her on a journey to that point. Because she's obviously going to have to change, things are going to have to change. So a lot of it is like, I truly see the ending as the culmination of a character as well as a story. And then rewinding helps me figure out the distance that I need to travel to get to that ending so that the ending feels earned. And that's why, I don't know if it will work for you. I can't know that, but I will say that 21 books in now, my endings have never changed. I have rewritten whole books from scratch, as you know. Vengeful, page 1 rewrite. Gathering the Shadows, large rewrite. The Archive and the Unbound and the Near Witch, large rewrite. But the endings have not changed because to me, the ending is the point. It's the point of it all. It's the thing I'm reaching toward, you know?
And I love that description because it makes it sound like your entire process can be summed up in a character coming to you and being like, you're probably wondering how I got here.
Exactly. It's so true. Exactly.
The other thing that I brought up earlier with, what are all of your books have in common with siblings is death and she knows I'm going to do
Death and siblings.
Death and siblings. So for those of you that don't know, Victoria is an only child, and I am the oldest of 6 children. So I am always fascinated by only children because I'm like, that must be so nice. But it's always been really interesting to me that Victoria's siblings feel so real. The relationships between siblings are always important, and they feel as though she understands them. So in Gallant in particular, there's not siblings per se, but there is close familial relationships that hold that space. And so in Gallant, why was it important for her, as someone who is essentially alone, to still have family, and how did you sort of like cross, like bridge that gap between like feeling alone and feeling lonely, but also having family?
I mean, it's a found family story, right? Every family member that she finds, it's found. Even there's one blood relation, but the rest is not. And I think that because this is going to sound super weird, I'm not sure if it'll make sense, but and this is my first ever like Gallant event, so forgive me if it doesn't. But because I'm an only child, every character, every sibling I write feels like found family. I didn't have them, so I'm like making them up from scratch. I'm making up every family relation, every dynamic that I wish I had. So 90% of the time I love being an only child, mostly because I'm pretty sure I would have killed my siblings. But like, I really like being the center of my parents' attention. Like, I mean, like being the center of everyone's attention, obviously, but like, I did miss. It's inherently lonely upbringing. You spend a lot of time in your own head, and I think that that's part of it. I think the other part of it is also the reason why my books don't always have romance in them. And that is like, I am fascinated by relationships. I'm fascinated by dynamics. And a romance is one kind of dynamic, but I think when there's a romance present in a story, it hierarchically starts to supersede every other relationship in our minds, if not on paper. It becomes the like central relationship. And I'm always just like, but there's like 13 archetypal relationships. You know what I mean? There's like siblings and parent-child and allies and enemies and friends and lovers and people thrown together, and there's all of these dynamics, and I want to spend time with them. And so I think for me, siblings become the thing that excites me most. It's like, and I think maybe it's because they embody friend and enemy. You see her understanding. But you're stuck with them, right? Like, you're stuck with them. Even when you don't like them, you love them. And to me, that is a really interesting dynamic, because when you write friends, you have to like them and love them. When you write enemies, you can, as a reader, love to hate them, but as a characters, you have to hate them. But like, one of my favorites is like, look at Cal and Alucard. They're family because of Rye. And they hate each other. That's great. But like, so anytime you have siblings, because the beautiful thing about siblings as well is like, it's its own accordion spectrum. Because you can have good sibling relationships and you can have bad sibling relationships. You can have close siblings. You can have Cal and Rye. You know, you can have characters that love and dote on each other, and you can have characters that feel like if not for blood, they would kill each other. And that sometimes they're still tempted. They're like, oh.
And sometimes they literally do.
And sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. So I think it's just that, like, to me, siblings begin to embody the full spectrum of toxicity and intimacy and everything that I want. And that's something I really love about, you'll meet a character named Matthew. He's a cousin. Also, one of the reasons I was like, we're not putting romance in this book, kids. There's like one boy of like, you know, dating age, and they are blood relations. But like, he's so sad. And she meets him at such a bad time. And I love that, because I love to think, even within my own world, I love to think, what if? What if you guys had met a couple of years earlier? What if you had met him? In fact, one of the very first things that the character that she meets says to her about Matthew is, he was such a lovely boy. Like, I wish you could have known him. And he's not dead. Like, he's there. But it's just this sense of like, it's not only who we meet, it's when we meet them. You ever feel like people come into your lives at just the right time? Or sometimes people come into your lives at the wrong time. And so I think those are the things I'm really interested about. It's like, sometimes it can feel when you write a character like, they feel too convenient if they're just there when they need to be there. I always want to think of my characters as in motion. And then it's like, sometimes they become in parallel motion, sometimes they become in perpendicular motion, sometimes it's just the right person at the wrong time. And so I think siblings just are all of it. Siblings give me absolute freedom to have like protectiveness and alienation and jealousy and all of it. Instead, I just have to have those feelings with myself as a child. It makes for a very cluttered existence.
So you brought up romance. So this has come up a lot with a lot of books. For those of you who have read many of Victoria's books, romance is typically not the central focus of the story.
Except for Addie, where it's like, have it all, and then be sad. People ask for a romance, so I was like, this is the closest you will ever get to a romance story. Enjoy it. Most of them no.
No, but this one, despite
It has a romance.
despite getting knocked for not having a romance,
I know.
it does actually have romance. Why did you choose to put a romance in this one that was so decentralized from the primary character?
So the romance, again, this is not a spoiler, the romance is between the parents. Olivia's parents are not in the book. They are in the book, but they don't exist at the time of the book. They've never been in her life. But they had a romance. I mean, they had one, you'll find it. And I think it's because even when romances are not central, they're important. And I also think it's like, the same reason people ask like why I still write like some straight male dudes every now and then. And it's because I think it's important that they're still on the page. They just don't have to be at the center of the story. It's not about erasing anything. I don't want to erase romance. I want to, as you said, in this story, in this particular story, I want to decentralize it and show that like, oh look, it can be there. For some reason, people aren't noticing it because it's in the corner of the page instead of the center of the page, but it's there and it informs the story so much of what isn't actually happening. And I think this comes back to like kind of my whole creative worldview, which is that like I would like to make a massively generalizing statement and say that there are two kinds of writers. And we're like 50,000, but like just stick with me. There are two kinds of writers. We write you houses. Our stories are houses. Some writers give you a key. They say go inside the house, explore every single room. If you don't see it, it's not there. Lay eyes on it, touch it. This is the entirety of the world. This is Tolkien. Go in, look around, touch everything. And then there are writers who say, I'm not gonna give you a key to this house, but I'm gonna pull the curtains back. And as you're walking past, I want you to look in. See what you can see in the room you can see. And it's up to you to infer everything that you don't see about the rest of the house. And then when the story's over, keep walking. And I think I'm that kind of writer. I don't want to give you a key to the house. I want to give you a picture window. I want to give you a glance. I want you to have to walk away at the end and know that the people are still there in the house, but you don't get to spend time with them anymore. That's exciting to me. I think so part of that is making sure that everything that you do see inside the house, I would say that you glimpse the parents in the hall, right? Like these things are important. They're important to the story, but I can't give them all equal weight in the story, and I don't want you to have equal access to them in the story. I've chosen hierarchically what you get to see in the room that you're looking at, and what you only get to glimpse in the hall, and what you don't get to see in the house. And hopefully I've given you enough that you can kind of infer what you need to. But that's a choice, not to give you more. That's perfect. I'm an ornery writer, and I don't want you to have keys.
Yeah. I do like that you said earlier that you can always keep going as long as you have an end. I'm going to be such a jerk about this. And every time you text me, I'm just going to be like, you have an end. Like, you have an end.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to do questions so guys think about what you would like to ask. But before we do that, the last thing I wanted to talk about was the art in the book. Because obviously this book is an absolute work of art in itself.
Then we just went into like QVC mode. We're like, the whole limited amount of time. You can get this book for $18.99. You know it was real bad.
How many more minutes do you have?
I know.
But one of the things in this book that was so interesting to me was much like you describing the
Yeah.
But one of the things that was so interesting to me about the art that ended up in the book, much like the fact that the book was what we initially described wanting to write, is that so much of the art was directly pieces, like set pieces that you talked about, but that aren't in the book.
Yeah. So the art, for those wondering, is essential to the book. I've been asked a lot by international readers, like, will the art be in the international editions? I'm like, the art is part of the story. These are not just like chapter breaks. These are not just decorative beats. So there are 8 illustrations in the book. They repeat. And every single one of them is part of the narrative, is a perspective in the narrative, is a very important piece. Now, it was also the scariest thing I've ever done because essentially it was a creative trust fall. I spoke to my editor, my publishing team very early on. I said, I think this book needs illustrations. And they were like, oh, like the decorative, like the you'll have chapter. And I'm like, no. Like, I think I need images to tell my story. And they're like, this is a novel. And they're like, I got you. But I need these. And I explained why. I'm not going to explain it to you because it's a spoiler. But I was like, I need them. What ended up happen, because I am not an illustrator, essentially I had to write 8 didactics, 8 summaries of an image, and I titled each and every one. And I tried to be my background's in poetry, so I tried to be as poetic and as atmospheric as possible because I knew that these little 8 summaries were going to go to an illustrator who was going to have to produce a Rorschach-ian ink blot style image that has images hiding inside of it. I mean, my poor illustrator, but it was a creative trust fall because, when you write books, you are the god of your world. I control the words that you read. And that's not really the case when you write comics or when you write for TV or film. You're writing a living document, something that's going to be interpreted. You as the viewer are not seeing that document. When you write a novel, word on the page, word in your eyes, image in your mind. I'm writing a movie that will hopefully play in your head the way that it played in mine. And so the illustrations was the most terrifying part of this project because I would have had to unpick the entire narrative without them. It would have been a completely different story. And so it was waiting. Like I sent the images off and then I had to wait and hope that the illustrator that I'd been paired with could convey what was on the internal landscape of my brain when I was writing these scenes. And I have to tell you that he has done an extraordinary.
Now, so that was what I wanted to point out. So this one in particular. So when I got the book in,
Give them a page number. They
oh,
have
sorry,
that.
it's on 147.
Oh, it's like a very read along. Please turn your page.
I feel like a kindergarten teacher.
I know, right?
But one thing I want to say about this one is when I got the book in order, inside, at the end of the chapter, it would have, towards the end of the process, it would have this tiny description of what this vision would be. And this one in particular, when I got the final copy and looked at it, was so exactly what everything she had said and written in words.
It's quite surreal.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Like,
Because
that's
you
what you
saw
did
the
not-
descriptions.
I
I didn't
didn't
make these.
No, you didn't.
And I didn't even do a sketch for my illustrator where I said like this has to go to the top, this has to go to the top. Like it was all emotive. And once you read the novel, you'll understand how incredibly powerful that is, given the illustration's role in the story for somebody to almost intuit what the images needed to be in order to tell the story. Yeah, it's so
amazing.
cool.
It's so cool.
I'm so glad it worked. It would have really sucked if it hadn't.
This would have been I
don't know what we would
She'd be
have
up
done.
here like,
I would have
this could have been way better.
there
guys.
were images in this book. Nobody believed in me. No, I feel incredibly fortunate because, yeah, it became an entity. Like, and also to tell your publisher, I'm like, I want to write a book. It's not really middle grade, it's not really YA, it's not really adult, but it has to have pictures in it. I don't know where it's going to sit on the shelf. Is that okay?
Not a picture book. Not a picture book.
Not a picture book. There was a fall on all of the facts, but I'm really grateful that I got to do it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful book. Okay, so we want to take questions from you guys. Like, who has a question?
Good news is it's like a very audible area, so
Yeah.
I feel like as long as you go whisper, we'll hear. Yeah.
So you did mention how Olivia was like trapped inside of a house sort of, and you based that off of your own feelings. And so I was wondering for the majority of your protagonists, if you based them off of yourself, if they were just a figment of your imagination, or based off of people you knew.
That's a great question. I'm going to repeat it. That Olivia, as a character, was kind of I described her as being inside a house alone, and that was very comparable to how I felt as a teenager, and whether or not all of my protagonists or most of my protagonists are similarly informed by me. No, in fact, most of the time, weirdly, like, I mean, they are in that when I'm writing for a specific age protagonist, I'm writing for a specific age of myself. So, like, the City of Ghost books, I'm writing Cassidy Blake for 10-year-old me. When I'm writing Monsters of Verity, like the Savage Song Art Duet, Kate Harper's for 17-year-old me. I'd say Olivia Pryor is probably for 15-year-old me. Addie LaRue is for 29-year-old me. So, like, it's very dependent on who I am. Or who I would have been when I was reading the book. I do tend to have somebody in a book, like Henry in Addie LaRue was me. That is the closest I've ever come to writing an autobiographical character. That's my phone, trying to be like, what do you need from me?
Seriously, I don't understand. What do you need, Henry?
Sorry. Like, Henry was the closest, Henry Strauss is the closest I ever come to writing an autobiographical character, and I never will do it again. Because usually I, like, scrape off a tiny piece of myself, like the house metaphor, and then I grow someone entirely different from it. I just have a little seed in there. But Henry was almost wholesale me, and that was deeply uncomfortable to do. I think you get one of those. I'm like, that's fine. Interestingly, the character that I relate most to in Gallant is called the Master of the House. I mean, I can't tell you literally anything about him.
But just remember that.
Just remember that I am the master of the house.
I think that's really true. I think it always is someone in the book that is some version. I also think that she cannot always see the forest through the trees. I think the rest of us in her life, particularly her parents, we will see a character and we'll be like, this is you. And she's like, oh, that's not me.
Yeah.
Isn't it though?
In retrospect, I mean, I'm probably Matthew and the master of the house. A little bit. Yeah.
Do you write these books as like what's that? And it's
Coping mechanisms. Am I writing the books as coping mechanisms, and if so, does it work? It doesn't work. It doesn't stop me from trying. I mean, here's the thing, right? All writing is catharsis first, right? We write books and we sit with those stories for a very long time before you sit with them. So for years, the books are ours. And in the time that they are ours, they are coping mechanisms. I mean, I look at a book like Vicious. Vicious was the closest thing to a coping mechanism I ever wrote because I never intended it to get published. I was genuinely just like, it was like a real big middle finger to publishing at the time. I was just like, you don't want me, I don't want you, I'm writing what I want. And then like somebody wanted it, but like I think somebody only wanted it because like that was how raw I had been in the writing of it, where I was just like truly doing what I wanted, unapologetically. No holds barred, because at that point in my publishing career, I had very little to lose. And I was like, come on, do what I want. Go on the, like go out swinging, basically. I mean, I think, I don't know. Like, yes, writing is therapy, but also writing is very bad for me. So I require other forms of therapy in my life. And this is really weird, because I think in this way, writing books gets harder as you go. Maybe it's because you hopefully get better and you demand more from yourself. For me personally, I never want my books to be apples to apples comparisons, so I always set a new challenge with each book. I really some days wish I would just write the same thing over and over again for my own sake. But I can't. I don't know. It makes it better.
I say that, and we've talked about this like frequently. One of the things that I've always said to her is that it's going to be a really good thing if we get through this lifetime and she never learns to time travel. Because her from the past would absolutely come and eat her from the present to get that talent. Like she does not remember, but like one of the things I think about writing, and for you in particular, is you start reading so much earlier than you start writing. So your skill or taste level is like here, and then you start writing. And those are moving in tandem. So your skills are always getting better, but you're never going to catch up with yourself, even if you get a little closer. And so I think for you, you're always looking to hit that next. Your taste is always getting better, and so you're always holding yourself to a higher level. And so you just have to accept that. So as far as like is it a coping mechanism? No, it's not.
No.
Like this movie, like vocal and open about how like Addie and Addie and your relations really through that club. How did you like work through that? Because I feel like as a writer, like myself, like
And like once you have like this huge commercial success, like being like, I can live up to this.
I do feel that way. I don't think I've gotten past it, to be honest. Like, I think one of the ways I got past it or tried to was writing a book that was as different from Abby as possible. And it's really interesting because I've had this like massive influx of new readers with Abby, and I've been asked a few times in interviews, like, will it be hard for you knowing that like Gallant is such a departure from Abby? And I'm always like, but Abby was a departure from everything that came before. And I do think that's one of the most difficult things is when you have something that has had the success like Abby, there's like a tiny voice in your head that says, you need to do that again. Like, stop doing what you're doing, start doing this. This worked better, this worked better. But the fact is, like, I had one Abby in my head. It's not like I held on to it like some golden ticket I hoped I wouldn't need. Like, I just had one. And I'm just starting to like build my next one. Like, meaning I'm just starting to build the story that I think in 5 to 10 years will sit on the shelf next to Abby. But at the same time, like, I think I would be so sad if all I could do was sit and wait for that next thing. Because I still want to write, like, I'm reading 3 more Shades of Magic books, and like, I'm writing one more, thank you. And I'm reading one more Vicious book, and yeah. But the thing is, it's a mind trip because like all of my books are being reprinted now with at the top, it's like my name, and then right above it, it says from the best-selling author of The Invisible Life of Patty LaRue. And before that, it was from the best-selling author of the Shades of Magic series, and it feels, I'm not gonna lie, like, I'm really struggling with it still. It's one of the reasons that Gallant was really hard to write, because the whole time I was reading it, I was like, who's gonna read this? Like, literally, like, it's like I went from this massive tone, expansive storytell to a fable. And I've already seen like some reviews that are like, it wasn't nearly as complicated or as, complex as Abby. And I'm like, of course it wasn't! It's literally a fable! But like, I think that the only way through is like force yourself forward, because like, I want to keep writing. And maybe in 5 to 10 years, I'll have another book that can sit in the same shelf space as Abby, but it won't be Abby. You will not be a sequel to Abby. Abby has no sequels. Please do not ask that question. Maybe you're thinking about asking that question. It's a standalone novel. But it's hard. It's hard. I listened to a really interesting TED Talk, which is a sentence I didn't think I would say, by Elizabeth Gilbert, about the success that she had after Eat, Pray, Love, and how you really only have 2 ways to go after a success that big. It either destroys you or it fully liberates you, because you know you'll never, ever hit that level of success again. It was like her first book. I am so glad that Abby wasn't my first, because I think if I had hit that level of success with Abby LaRue as my debut novel, I'd be ruined. I would be completely paralyzed by the entire situation. As this is my 20th novel, and I still feel a little bit like every now and then I'm sinking in quicksand at the very thought of it. I don't think you ever get out of your own way, but here's what I'll say too. Something you said caught me, which is that you said it's scary to show anyone you're writing. And it might be read. And it is, I'm not gonna lie. But I also think it's one of the main differences between wanting to be a writer and wanting to be an author. And both are completely valid pursuits. But you can write all your life with no concern for audience and be completely fulfilled by that. If you want to be an author, like meaning the occupation, unfortunately being read comes with it. Like, you have to find a way. One of the very first things I had to do was like get past that fear. And the fear doesn't go away. Your hope just has to exceed your fear by a little bit, right? But you have to at some point come to terms and have a little thrill at the idea of being read, the narcissism of being read, because like that's the job. Like, literally, there's no author out there. It's like, I hope nobody ever reads my books, just because like then I would have no job. But it's not to say it's not hard. You learn to put on armor. You take all that armor off in order to write a book, and then somehow you have to put it back on when the book's received. And I think one of the important things, if you do get to that point, is remembering that like once the book comes out, the conversations that happen around it, and with it are not for you. Once the book comes out, it stops being mine, and it becomes yours. I have done everything that I can do. Reviews will come along, but I can't change it. The book is printed. The book is out there. The book is in its final form. And I welcome like all the conversations that come with it, but there's a detachment you have to learn that comes with stepping back and realizing like my part is done. now I must go on to do the next thing. And some of it's just that I've tried to quit writing. I have.
Every single day.
I have. When I tried after Addie, it was the first time in my whole career where I thought I'd be okay if I didn't do this ever again. And it wasn't, that sounds very negative, but it was really just like, I couldn't see a way through it. And then after about a week, I was like, I had my fingers start itching. And I'm like, well, even if nobody ever reads it, I should probably write something. So I think it's just realizing where is the need. For me, it's like need. I started out with it as like a creative outlet, something that I desperately needed, and I'm rediscovering that.
I think it's also important to note that like Addie took 10 years to write. This was not like an overnight novel. Like this novel took 6 months.
It's not an overnight
No, it's not. It's not a decade either. And I think that one of the things you said to me recently on the phone was, you know, Addie was sort of planted in a field and there was nothing there at the time, and this one seed went in the ground, and it took 10 years to become a tree. And she actually called me a couple of months ago and said, I think I just planted something else in that field. But it's like, that's gonna take years. But there is just a difference between those projects.
Oh, sure. I mean, in the time it took Addie to grow into a tree, I wrote and published 19 novels. Like, just remember that, you know? Like, that's the thing, is like, everything else happened along the way of that. And I think that's one of the reasons I try and tell writers not to be super precious. Like, if you have one of those ideas, those tree ideas, don't let it stop you from also planting flowers. Like, because the fact is, like, I know people who will spend their entire lives, their entire careers on that tree. And I think that's a way to get stuck, and that's a way to get lost. Also, that's a way to put an extraordinary amount of pressure on one story. And the advice that I always give to writers who are early on in their career is like, you always have to be writing. Because if your book does well, you're gonna need another book, and if your book doesn't do well, you're gonna need another book. So I think having a sense of forward, creative, relentless momentum is important.
So we have some of the questions for everybody online.
Oh yeah.
Not just using my phone up here like, nah, she's really
Patricia's like, I've done it on purpose.
I will say, my partner just texted me that my 11-year-old thinks I'm cool.
Oh, very nice. Thanks, Lily.
Okay, so one of the questions was, how long does it take to assemble an ending?
Ooh,
Which I think is a really, really good question.
1 day to 10 years. No, but usually about a week. But like, it's like all that I think about. The same way that you might stress out over like the first sentence, the first lines, the first word. I'm not writing the actual words of the ending, but I'm trying to create a picture in my head. What is the, like in the really kind of trashy movie way where like, you know, the last frame freezes and then like fades out. Like what's that freeze? Like what's that moment? But I also remember, I mean, I talked to you a few weeks ago, that I realized I finally had like the end for Threads. Mm-hmm. And like, I've been working through the first book in Threads of Power, which is book 4 in Shades of Magic, I just don't know how to call it. It's like book 1 in Threads of Power, aka book 4 in Shades of Magic. Anyway, but it's a new trilogy. And I had the ending for the first book, and I didn't have the ending for the third. And that's like never, for me, that was a panic attack waiting to happen. So I stopped for about a week. It's happening all the time. So I stopped for a week. And all I did for that week was be like, how does this series end? How does this arc end? And then I basically did choose your own adventure with myself for a week of like asking, okay, what's one possibility? Okay, what's better? Okay, what's different? Okay, what's better? Like, it's just playing. And you don't have to have a perfect ending before you start writing. You just have to have an ending that inspires you. You have to have an ending that feels satisfying to you. That's the thing. It's not perfect.
I think that's why your endings, we always talk about this. Whenever you have that final scene, it feels so much like that cinematic, like a movie ending where you like hear the sound drop and like the music come up for the credits. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you put so much into that moment.
I just wanted to feel earned because like, I've been told my books are slow. Not necessarily about it, but here's the thing, right? I do think my books are slow in some ways. I think the first third is gradual. And I think the reason I'm doing this is to use my 35th metaphor for the evening. I like to think of it as I'm setting the game board. In order for you to care when the game ends, I need to take time to set the board as well as play it. So the first third of the book for me, while I try to work in some action, is also me setting the pieces up and letting you get to know the pieces in the board and the game that we're playing so that I can then play the game and have you care about the outcome of the game. Sometimes I think you know, what good is the outcome if you haven't taken the time to care about the people on the board?
All right, we're gonna do one more here and then I have one fun one for you. This one is, I love, we've done this at other events. So it's, if you had to put another character from one of your other works into Gallant, who would you pick?
I mean, I'm very tempted by August.
Oh,
Yeah, I think August. I'm not actually, okay, but I'm not actually sure August could face the master of the house. So that's a problem. So August is out. This is me now taking my game pieces and being like, could you beat him? Could you beat him? I never played Pokemon, but I'm guessing that's a Pokemon. I mean, my default answer tends to be Lila Bard because there's almost nothing that she can't do.
That would be interesting.
Lila Bard versus Master of the House.
You know who is Marcella?
Ooh. Yeah, because she could probably burn it down. Okay, yeah. Well, no, okay, but the thing about what the whole thing is, it's like already kind of.
I know, that's why she.
Okay, we'll go with Marcella. Marcella Riggins from Vengeful versus, this is Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
Master of the House. Yeah, Marcella.
So, I know you guys want to get books personalized, so we're gonna round this up with one. My final question for you. If you get your cake shop and Gallant becomes a cake book, what kind of cake is it?
Oh God. You know, I always want to say where I thought, look, my mom has this fear of like foods that are wrongly colored. So I won't get a velvet cake because of the unnatural color of the cake. So I'm gonna go with like, what's that chocolate that's so dark? It's not even dark chocolate, it's like a midnight cake. Like I like just the darkest bittersweet. Like, or no, so in Scotland we have a Guinness cake. And it's like a dark chocolate Guinness cake. It's not even very sweet. It's almost like bittersweet chocolate. So that would be the center. And then it would have raspberry jam surrounding
You into thinking
around
this
it.
was
Making it
painful.
sweet. And then it would have like a silky buttercream around the outside.
That's accurate.
That would be it, yeah. On that note, somebody make me a cake.
All right, you're gonna turn it back over to Lilia.
Yes.
I went up. Thank you both again so much for being here, having these conversations, for writing wonderful, fantastic, engaging books.